Okay, this is Frederick Keniston at Axiom, and I'm giving you training on our Microsoft Office importer program for MicroStation V8 all the way up through V8i, whatever the current Select Series is. I'm using Select Series 4 for this particular training. Now, when you install an Axiom program, you get this Axiom menu selection here off your main MicroStation menu, and when you click it, the first section of this menu is our MicroStation Productivity Toolkit for V8. That's a package of programs which stretches from CellManager down through Version Manager at 16 programs. And Microsoft Office Importer is one of those programs. When you click this menu item here, it'll run this toolbar that I'm pulling around here. And this toolbar gives you the ability to import Microsoft Word files and Excel files, or portions of them, into MicroStation design files with very exact formatting. The program also has versions that run in AutoCAD and Revit. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is show you the basic way to paste data. And by doing that, I'm going to open up a sample file that I commonly use, and I'll highlight a section of this Excel file, and then I'll right-click over the selection and click Copy. I'll then return to MicroStation, and I'll click this first button, Paste. What this does is this will cause the program to analyze the information, turn it into MicroStation elements, and then with a click of a mouse, it pastes the data. And when I zoom in, you'll see the formatting. Now, this paste is a collection of text and lines. However, the default for how the elements are pasted is to paste them as a cell. So if I adjust my view here a little bit, you'll see that if I put my cursor over any portion of it, the entire paste, shows that it can be selected or highlights. As a result, after you've pasted the data, you can grab any part of it and then move it if you need to more precisely place the information after you've got it pasted in. Now, once you've got the data pasted in, what can you do with it? Well, a number of things. And one thing I wanted to do a little aside on, I failed to mention, is because it's MicroStation elements, you could give this design file to anyone. And if you do and do not include the source file, it doesn't matter. They're going to see what you see in the design file. And it doesn't rely on the source file to show the data. So if you give someone else the design file and you don't include the source file, they're not going to get any odd link errors or anything like that. They're just going to see the elements that were pasted into the design file. Now it is linked back to, or the paste is linked back to the program, or through the program to the source file. So if you have Microsoft Office Importer and you get a file like this, you could do this. You could click the manage, or actually the first button, edit source here, and that will find the source file to the paste. If you have more than one Microsoft Office Importer paste in the file, it will prompt you to say which paste you want to work with, and then you give it a second mouse click to confirm that's the one. And then it will find the source file and highlight the exact pasted area for the paste, so you don't have to go looking around for it. Now, once you're here, you can do some things like this. You can modify it, and I'm going to change the color of this text in the header, and I'll also change the information in this cell, and I'll save the file. Then when I go back, I'll go to this button, which is Manage, and from here, I'll tell it to update, and that will update the paste based on the changes I made in the source file, as you see there. Now, that's the basic operation. You paste the data in, and then when you need to do updates, you update the paste manually. Or, as you'll see here, there's an option in the Manage dialog box to update automatically when the design file opens. That's the default setting when you paste the data. And what happens is if you close the design file the next time you open it, it will look at the source file, look at the exact pasted area, and if it sees changes, it will update the paste without any intervention from you. However, you can modify that behavior through the settings, which I'll show you more on in a little while. This dialog box gives you a couple of other things as well. Notice this is the name of the source file. If that file name changes, or if it moves on disk, you can click this select button, navigate out, and pick it up again. It'll reset the link to the file. Also, that you'll see here, in addition to update automatically when the design file opens, you could lock the pasted elements. You would turn this on and then click apply, and what would happen is then it would just prevent you from inadvertently or on purposely editing the elements directly in the paste. Now, if you have the elements locked, you can still update the source file and still then click the update button. It will still update the paste that way. You just wouldn't be able to edit the elements directly. You also see the option here, which is group the pasted elements into cells. I alluded to that earlier, where when you first paste the data, by default, it groups the paste as a cell. That way, like I showed you, you can put your cursor over any portion of it and move the paste if you need to more precisely place it. This dialog box also gives you another feature, which is the Excel attributes. And notice it gives you top left cell and bottom right cell for this particular paste. It's the range of the paste, basically. Now, when you look at this paste, you'll see that on the right here is my remarks column. If I edit the source file now, and I insert a new column, for example, and save the file, and then go back and I say update, it's going to push this remarks column outside of what was the original pasted area. So these fields allow you to then adjust the scope of the paste so that it will pick up not only the new data, but the data that was part of the paste initially as well. You could also use those fields to expand or contract the scope of the paste, or even move the scope of the paste if you needed to do something like that. So that was pasting with Excel. You can also do the same thing with Word. And in Word, I'll grab a section here of the spreadsheet, or of this Word file, sorry, and copy it. This has numbered paragraphs, indented, numbered, and bulleted paragraphs, and some table data as well. Now click paste. It analyzes the information, and then with a click of a mouse, actually sometimes with this beta version, the initial paste goes a little wonky. There we go. All right, so when I zoom in, you'll see it's got the numbered paragraphs, indented, numbered, and bulleted paragraphs. And then when I scroll down further, it's got the table data as well. And just like I showed you with Excel, if I adjust my view here a little bit, zoom in, I can click the Manage button, click once on the paste I want to manage, and then click again to confirm that. Click Edit Source, and then I can add like a new line and save the file. And then when I go back, based on the saved change that I made, I'll click Update, and you'll see that it updated the paste accordingly. So that's the basics. Now, it's very easy to use as far as that goes, as far as just grabbing data and pasting it in. But this border that I've got here, this representation of a border, is for a specific feature, which I'll show you now. Let me just adjust my view a little bit here. All right, so now I'm going to go into the settings. Actually, let me save my settings here. And the settings for Microsoft Office Import is this last button that you see that I just clicked. When you click it, it opens this dialog box, and under pasting, I can split paste into columns. And when I turn that on, it allows me, or makes this option available, repeat Excel header row of so many rows. In this case, I'll put 5 because I happen to know that my source file has 5 rows of header information. So I'll save that setting, click OK, and I'll go back to my spreadsheet now. I'll undo this one column. And now I'll grab all of my spreadsheet and do a copy. And now I'm going to paste it into this border region. And I'll show you how split paste into columns works. So I'll click once in the upper left, pull down and to the right. When I do so, it gives me a representation of where the columns are going to fall, including where the header information is going to copy over the columns that split off. So I'll click, and by the way, if you move your cursor up or down, it'll adjust the height of the columns. If you move it left or right, it'll adjust the spacing between the columns. So after the last click, it then pastes the columns, and you'll notice on the second column here and the third column here, it copied the header information over. And you'll also notice when I use my selection tool that each one of the columns is individually selectable. The reason for that is it just makes it possible that after you've got them pasted, if you need to, you can grab the columns and more precisely place them if you need to do so. And if you do, the way the program works, it will leave the columns where you last placed them. In other words, it won't shift them back to where they were first pasted. Another feature of split paste into columns, which we also call column flow for short, is that if in this scenario I go out and I update my source Excel file and I insert a bunch of rows, the next time I do an update, if it sees that this last column here, based on the rows I inserted, is going to be taller than the columns before it, then it will automatically, on update, if it needs to, split off a new column. In addition, it'll also do the opposite. If I delete a bunch of rows from the spreadsheet and on update of the paste, it sees that that last column is no longer needed due to how many rows I deleted from the source file, then it will remove it without any intervention from me upon update. So that's split paste into columns or column flow. Now I'm going to go into this list of links dialog box, and then go into the settings. So under list, this lists the current Microsoft Office importer links in the file. If I double click on a link, it'll take me right to the paste, so I don't have to go looking around for it. Here I can open the manage dialog box for the paste I've got selected or the link I've got selected for a paste. I can edit the source file. Update, I can pick or choose one or more of these. Click update, it'll check the source files for all the pastes, and then based on changes in those exact areas of those pastes in the source files, it'll update the paste accordingly. I can also delete paste with this button as well. How many of them are selected, and click delete, it will delete them. So I'll close this, and now we'll go into the settings to wrap this up. So the text, by default, it will bring it in with whatever, in this case, it'll bring it in with a default symbology of 000, and in this case, put it on the default level. But you can specify through here in the formatting what exact symbology you want it to have, and also what level you want it to come in on. And separately, you can do the same thing for borders. Under font, this is the default, which is it uses the same font as the source document. That's going to get you the most exact match. But if you need to paste with a default font, any font that's available to you in MicroStation you could paste with, any TrueType font, and if AutoCAD is installed, any AutoCAD font you could paste with as well. Now, one thing I'm going to show you related to that before I get into the rest of the settings is this. Let's say you're pasting with a default font. We'll use engineering just as an example. So I'll save my settings, File, Save Settings, click OK. And now I'm going to go adjust my view here and go down to a cleaner area, zoom in just a touch. I'm going to go and grab another section of my spreadsheet, do a copy, go back, and I'll paste that data. Oh, I left on my split paste into columns on, and actually I need to undo all that. Let me go back. Split paste columns is off, save. All right, now it'll come out right. So I click paste, and it analyzes the information. I click once, and then notice when I zoom in, you see how under the station offset columns, how the text is crowding the border lines, like not only in the height, but also in the width. This is a font mapping issue. This is relatively minor one because it doesn't make the text unreadable or cut off any text or anything like that. But font mapping issues are caused by differences in the font that exist in Word or Excel compared to the font that you're pasting with in MicroStation. If it's more severe, then what might happen is the text might overwrite the border lines, either in the height or width or both. And if it's even more severe, it might even cut off some of the text. So what I'm going to do is show you how to mitigate font mapping issues like this if you run into them. Now, first is going to be in Word or Excel to utilize a font that matches as closely as you can gauge it with your eyes the font that you're pasting with in MicroStation. So if you're using a MicroStation font, you're not going to have a MicroStation font in Word or Excel to choose to paste with. So you're going to have to choose a TrueType font that matches as closely as you can gauge it, do a couple of test pastes until you have the font that gets you the best result, and then save your Word and Excel file using that font, and then do your paste from there. That's one. That would work for font mapping issues both in Word and Excel as far as that first one. The next two are Excel specific. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. I'm going to do another paste of this same data without changing anything. And then I'm going to show you the second way that you can mitigate a font mapping issue. Let me just center that here. So notice it is crowding the borderlines here a bit. Now what you can do is manage this particular paste, edit the source file, and then you can adjust the borderlines, not only the columns, like the column width, but also the row height, and save the file. Once you make that change and you save the file, Microsoft Office Importer will recognize that as a change to the source file. So you can then do an update, and it will update the paste based on those changes, as you see here. So that's the second way, is you can adjust your column width and your row height as needed in Excel to give more space around the text in the cells if you needed to do something like that. So that's the second one. Now the third one, I'm going to undo this change in MicroStation, and I'm also going to undo those changes in the Excel file. And now I'm going to go into the settings again, and this time I'm going to go into scale. Now this is a default scale factor, this 1:1, which is a ratio, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But the setting that I'm most interested in is this height padding and width padding. This controls the blank area around the text in each one of the cells. Now, I know from some test paste I did, and you may have to do some test paste adjusting these figures. I know that 3.0 and 1.5 are going to give me a very good amount of blank space around the text to make the text very readable for any paste I would then do later. So I'll adjust those. I'll save my settings, click OK. Now I'll scroll down a little bit more, and I'll paste that same data. And you'll see after I do so, it's going to dramatically change how that data looks when I paste it. So notice as I scroll down here, you see how there's a lot more space around the text in each one of these cells in the station offset columns. So that's the last way in Excel of mitigating a font mapping issue. You can adjust that height padding and width padding figure, do a couple of test pastes until you get the data to display in the cells the way you want, then save those settings, and then the next time you're pasting from that Excel file, or an Excel file like I showed you, then it will give you the spacing that you had previously tested. Now, when I go back to settings, we'll then finish this off here. So that was text and font and handling a font mapping issue. Under borders, in addition to what I showed you, you can bring the borders in as they exist in the source file. That means if there are border lines there or not, it will either draw the ones that are there and not draw the ones that aren't there. You can always draw lines, whether they exist around the cells or not. It will then always, as a default, draw them. Or never, which just brings over the text-based data. Scale, this is a ratio, and I'll explain this more now that we're here. So this 1:1, if I click calculate, this will make more sense. You tell it the size of the text in Word or Excel, which was 10 points in this case, and then you tell it the height in mass units and the width in mass units that you need the text to paste at in MicroStation. Once you fill in that data and you press your tab key, it will automatically then calculate the ratio necessary to bring in the text from Word or Excel and paste it at a height and width of 10 in mass units. Now you could add other scale factors to care for other things. For example, if I click the Add button and then click give it a name like 12 point or 12 PT. Now let's say sometimes I have input files that have 12-point text as opposed to 10, like the unnamed scale had initially. So I'll click calculate now, and I'll just change this first figure to 12. Let's say I still need it to paste at 10 and 10 in mass units. So I'll click OK, and then I'll save my settings. Now I've got these 3 scale factors to choose from. If I click OK, then it will use the scale factor the next time I paste that I last had selected. So if I forget that and I go back and grab a swatch on my spreadsheet and then paste that, notice on the secondary dialog box, it gives me the ability to choose the saved text paste scale from the settings file. So let's say I didn't need the 12.1, I needed the unnamed one, which was 1:1. So it can change it then on the fly based on me choosing it through that secondary dialog box. When I go back, you'd also save out other settings or settings files for different projects or for work with different customers. For example, if I go File, Save Settings As, I can give it a name like a project number, something like that. We'll say Project 0085, save it. And notice in the title bar, that's the name of the currently loaded settings file. I could then go to Scale, and I could change these settings. Say this is 10 pt, and then I need to change, let's say, my height padding and width padding back to whatever the default value was, and then save those settings. Now, the next time I load the settings file, it will have whatever settings I saved that were specific for that I want, or specific for what I wanted to have for that project, and it will then have them available. Then when I need to go work on another project, or maybe load Microsoft Office Importer's default settings, I'll go File, Load Settings. In this case, I tend to keep my default settings in Office.ini here. Actually, I've modified it a bit so it has these other things. But I'll go ahead and just reset my factory defaults now, and then save my settings. So now this has my default settings. Under pasting, this is where you split paste into columns. And you have some options here for also telling it to define the Excel paste width manually or the Word paste width manually. When you turn these on, like for example, Word, and save that, if I go and I grab like just a couple of paragraphs here and paste that, when I go back and zoom in a little bit, I'll paste the data, click, and then notice it allows me to adjust where exactly I want the width to be. So if I click it way out here, it spreads it out as much as it can for the lines. In other words, it just straightens out the lines so that they're in the width that I gave it. They're no longer wrapped at all. So the width I gave it was so wide that it didn't have to wrap any of the lines at all. Now there's another option similar, but it works differently, which is under the scale area. And if I, let me turn that one off here for a second. So when I go back to scale, this time I'm going to use this 2 points method. When I click that and then paste the data, what it's going to do is allow me to click once, and then if I click again, it's going to use the distance between those points as if they were the actual page width, as opposed to the page width of the actual data from the Word or Excel file, and then it will wrap the text accordingly. Now that might have been a little too wide. I'll give you another example here just below it. If I paste again, notice how it scaled it down. So it used that distance as if it was the page width, and then it scaled it up or down accordingly. Also, under pasting, you can lock the pasted elements, which is not the default. Again, this is the option that you saw in the Manage Link dialog box. It also, by default, will group the pasted elements into cells. This is where that option comes from that you saw in the Manage Link dialog box. Under linking, by default, it creates a link back to the original document, and it sets it to update automatically when the design file opens. Now, the reason that it works in that fashion is in 1996, which is how long this program's been around, we surveyed a bunch of design and engineering areas, and they told us that in most cases, they would often get Word and Excel files from other areas outside of their design and engineering areas, like management and finance. And when they did so, they said those same files would often be updated throughout the life of the project, and that data needed to be made part of their design files. So they didn't want to run into an instance where if the program worked in a fashion where you could paste into MicroStation, then write back from MicroStation to the source file, they didn't want that because they didn't want one's changes to overwrite the other's changes in that fashion, because it might cause a problem where the actual updated data then got overwritten by a change in the other area. So instead of going two ways, based on that data, we decided to make it a one-way flow with the source file being Word or Excel and the paste being a reflection of what's going on in the source file. So that's why that works that way, and it creates a link back to the original document. Now, there are maybe 5 or 10% of the Microsoft Office importer users over the 3 different platforms it runs on. And there also might be a workflow issue where it might make sense to paste the data without linking back to the source file. If you want to do something like that, here's what we'd have you do. Go File, Save Settings As, give it an obvious name like unlinked, save the file, and then turn off this option and then save your settings. With this settings file loaded, any paste I make now will not be linked back to the source file, but I can still paste it with the same formatting I want and split it into columns, that sort of thing. But then from then on, I could just edit and update and modify the pasted data directly in MicroStation without having it inadvertently update from a link back to a source file. So if I needed or wanted to paste data where I just wanted to maintain it within MicroStation, that's how you would do it. Then when you're ready to work with the program as it's was originally designed, you go File, Load Settings, load the appropriate settings file for the job you're working on or the project or the client, and then continue with your work. Under Updating, this is where it will update all automatic paste when the design file opens without asking, or you can tell it ask before updating any automatic paste. In that case, you open the design file and it looks at the source files, looks at the exact pasted areas, and if it sees changes, it will prompt you saying, do you want to update the paste, yes or no? You can also tell it don't update any automatic paste at all. In that case, you can still manually update the paste through the Manage Link dialog box or the List of Links dialog box. And lastly, to wrap this up, project-wise, this gives you the ability to do two things. One is you can create a link using the local file path for project-wise, or a link using the project-wise URL. If you set this, and you do work in project-wise as a rule, then just make sure you go File, Save Settings, and then that will be the default in that settings file, where every time you make a paste, it'll then create a link using the project-wise URL. So that's the program. Now I'm going to cover a few other things which will help you beyond just what I showed you in this training video. One is when you go back to the settings through the settings button and you go Help, Contents, this gives you the Microsoft Office importer documentation in Windows Help form. Now, if you look here, Chapter 4, this is a quick start. Almost all of our programs, it's like maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3, don't have this, but this is the basic tutorial for the program. And it gives you all the data that you'd need in order to utilize this particular tutorial. And it'll even tell you where to go find the sample files that are installed with the program. And then in this case, it has 6 different tutorials that it walks you through the basics of using the program. And all the things that I showed you are pretty much the same through the tutorial. In fact, I just basically made the pattern the training after what you'd find in the tutorial. But if you need to go and work on it yourself directly, then you can do so through this quick start guide. After the quick start guide, the rest is the full documentation of the program. Every button, option, setting, etc. is described in detail. In addition, it has troubleshooting chapter, which goes over like character mapping for special symbols and mapping special characters when you're pasting documents open via a URL, handling pasting tables, different ways to handle that, and different things related to handling Microsoft Word documents. It's got a bunch of different data that'll help you out here. Additionally, if you run into something that you need some help with, and you go back, you can go Help, About, and this will, by default, open up a web page in your browser. And this web page will give you information that might be useful if you need assistance from Axiom's technical support. One is it gives you the exact version of the program that's installed. It'll tell you data about your license, what type of license it is, when it expires, if you have a license that is set to expire. Some people do, some don't. What the build date was of the program, and also where the license file is that the program found and that it's utilizing. In addition, on the right, if you need to contact Axiom for anything, either for technical support or for information on other products and getting pricing and that sort of thing, then you can call the number here, and you also have our fax number. You also go to our website through this link. You also have our tech support knowledge base. You can create a new support ticket. And you can also send an email directly to support through this link here. And what this does is when it hits our server, it will automatically create a support ticket for it. And then all of our technical personnel are on support duty, so you can answer back pretty quick. And then for pricing, ordering information for other Axiom products, you can click that link there and send an email say, and tell us, what information you want on what products, and the appropriate salesperson will get you the data that you need. So that's all I've got. That's the